Supports are honestly the best choices to make when deciding on who you should summon for or who you should invest further into regarding Eidolons or Cinemas or Constellation. This applies to any miHoYo game, and here's why. Now, if you're a player of HSR or Genshin Impact, you already know that across all miHoYo games, every DPS basically gets power crept. Because DPSs are entirely judged by how much damage they deal, the moment another character comes by that deals even slightly more damage or is more accessible to achieve that damage, they are immediately, at least the previous ones, are pushed out, whereas the newer ones are the newest meta character. Under normal circumstances, this isn't a problem. However, the downside of this occurs when the fact that miHoYo just decides under pretty much every circumstance to adapt the content to the damage they're expecting you to have, and that damage just so happens to be related to the current unit. In the aspect of Genshin, we saw essentially every Inazuman character release with energy problems. Now, this wasn't a problem for certain units like Ayaka, who didn't necessarily need the Raiden Shogun and had access to teams that generated pretty decent energy for her, and this could be circumvented by using Favonius. But for any team or any character that could and idealistically wanted to be paired with Raiden, they automatically had energy problems. The Aimiko had a 90 energy cost that was either resolved by having the Shogun in the team or getting C1. Kujosara, an ideal buffer for Raiden, also had energy generation problems. So you kind of needed to pair her with that. In Fontaine, we saw newer units that were DPSs like Lenny, Lynette, Nuvolette, Arlecchino, Clorind, and Navia. Despite all being decent DPSs, Nuvolette and Lenny kind of came out on top, and then Arlecchino as well. And now the reason Nuvolette came out on top was, first off, his damage was higher, yes, and then secondarily, he also had much more accessibility than previous characters. But this isn't a DPS-oriented video, this is a support-oriented video, which is why in Genshin's case, Kazuha, Nahida, and Furina are your top examples. In HSR, it's Ron Mei, Sparkle, Bronya, Robin, and any healer, even Fu Xuan and Adventurine. Despite them not being healers, they are preservation units and they do keep your team alive regardless. And so in the examples you're going to have are characters like Lucy, who are defined strictly as a supportive unit. This also extends to characters like Soukaku. Any character that offers good buffs, in this case it would be Caesar. If you need an example of that in miHoYo games, just look at Zhongli. He is still extremely good, especially for any character who doesn't want to be interrupted, which is basically any bow character. By proxy, this can extend to any supportive stun unit. Now, stun units are an interesting position because they do deal damage, yes, but they aren't on the likes of a dedicated attacker or any realistic anomaly character, because anomaly characters do take up similar amounts of field time, and in some instances you probably don't need to use a stun character with an anomaly. But I'm just using them as an example in this instance because most stun characters kind of come with more team-oriented buffs or core passives. Whilst Qingyi improves her own damage, she also subsequently improves the damage enemies take while stunned. Koleda does the exact same thing, with her chain attack damage bonus. And so, as of right now, stun characters are supportive oriented. And yes, this does extend even further into their cinemas, Qingyi reducing the enemy defense. Whilst Lycan's cinemas don't improve his team's damage, he has a base resistance shred, which already makes him a really good support for any ice-oriented team. But if you're looking at DPSs, from Nekomata to Ellen Zhou, Zhuyan, Jane Doe, these are all good units, and don't get me wrong, you can use any of them. You can even use the 4-stars like Korin. You can use Soukaku as a DPS, Piper, Anton, and so on. You have options. But the problem with these options is unless a character like Nekomata, Zhuyan, Ellen, or Jane Doe suddenly decide to start offering team-wide buffs, they are going to get pushed out. The moment Zhuyan does more damage than Nekomata, Nekomata isn't relevant. Not necessarily bad, but more so isn't as good as she used to be. This isn't too bad, at least as of right now, but as you're seeing in the new Shiyu defense, at least the one that's permanent content right now, it really wants you to have Caesar. And if you don't have Caesar, your only other option is to A, dodge, or B, somehow uphold Seth, because we don't have any active healers. And even though Ben Bigger is a defensive unit, he's nowhere near on the same level as someone like Seth, and especially not Caesar. If you're looking at Caesar and her utility long term, yes, she gives you a ton of potential attack, but even if you're potentially investing into her cinemas, you have more attack and all type resistance direction. This is on par with something like either Viridescent Venerer in Genshin Impact, or just Luocha in HSR, because he also has something similar to this. Now, I'm not saying immediately pull Caesar. I am saying, though, that Caesar will have more longevity compared to other characters. A DPS is a DPS is a DPS. Every DPS that occupies the same role with no utility and no team-wide buffs gets pushed out pretty quickly. Content gets geared towards them. Caesar, despite offering an immense attack buff and a really strong shield, also removes the ability for a lot of characters, or the necessity for a lot of characters, to start dodging. This means that if somebody was stationary to deal damage, they have a ideal partner who gives them a lot of buffs. Nekomata relies on dodging a lot to get her core passive, because if you didn't know, she primarily wants to dodge for that 60% damage increase. And she also needs assault to be inflicted, so you kind of want to pair her with a physical team. This sounds good until you realize that because you have Caesar, you don't need to dodge, so you're getting that 1500 attack buff, but part of Caesar's kit is being put to waste, because that shield isn't as useful anymore, unless you are just bad at dodging. Juyan herself is already a good DPS, don't get me wrong, and she does increase her own crit rate, making her easier to build, but increasing your own stats isn't nearly as valuable as increasing the overall team's damage, whether that be through energy generation, a team-wide party buff, or anything at all, even stun. Because yes, you can hyper-invest into one particular unit. You can love Juyan, you can love Ella and Joe, and you can hyper-invest into these units, and they are going to perform extremely well. But 9 times out of 10, investing either A, into your supports, or B, into the entirety of your team pays off better because everybody contributes more. And let's all be honest here, nobody likes farming for perfect artifacts, which is why I've left mine the way they are. And for certain characters, examples being Juyan, the weapon banner isn't exactly worth it because the weapon itself isn't that big of an increase. And if you wanted to simulate that buff you could get from the weapon, just use Nicole, who's your only other option. The TLDR is, if you're looking at the banners right now and you're going for either saving for any of the reruns of the previous DPSs, obviously go for who you like. If you simp for Jane Doe, go for her. If you simp for Ellen, go for her. But understand that it will take more investment for these characters to remain relevant long term, especially as newer, stronger, more versatile characters come out. We've already seen that we've gone from characters who just give themselves 30 crit to characters who give, hey, here's a shield, here's 1500 attack, and here's a bunch of stun. Bernice extends burning duration. That's exceptional for anybody who wants to utilize the burning set. She is a fire anomaly character, meaning that she's already theoretically on par with someone like Jane Doe, but fire is, as a team and as an archetype, already built out. You have Lucy, who's a great fire support and just a great support all around. You have Koleda, you have multiple other options. Ben Bigger, as an example. And so, whereas DPSs are incredibly dependent on their team to really get that damage out, whether that be being stunned, being buffed, whatever, a buffer just does their job. Pull for any buffer. We saw how early Bronner was good in HSR, and we see that she's still decent now, but realistically, any limited support is just going to be better. If you're looking for the longevity of shields in HoYo games, look no further than either Fu Xuan and Adventuring, or Zhongli and Genshin. All of which are still doing wonderfully. And yes, defensive utility may fall off, especially if you get to a point where you can dodge or you're not really dealing with damage from the enemies, instead just need to kill them. But at that point, the buffs Caesar offers you are still exceptionally strong. Also, HoYo just doesn't understand how to design a balanced support and just kind of makes them overtuned. Look at Nahida. She's necessary for any Dendro team. By the way, that's my little ramble, I suppose. I'm still building Nekomata. I still like her a lot, but I understand wholeheartedly that she's going to be pushed out as more DPSs get released. Subscribe, because I'm pretty sure like 80% of you aren't subscribed, 90% of you aren't subscribed, probably 98. 98's my guess. I'll see you next time.